Hello there, Brick Fanatics. Here it is, the latest in the Ninjago City collection. This is Ninjago City Workshops. I hope you like big ol' mechs. This, I think, is a brilliant direction for the Ninjago City collection to go in because it ties together these Ninjago City sets, which are increasingly their own thing in terms of identity, and then it pairs that with what Ninjago as a theme has been doing very well for the past few years, which is big ol' mechs, and here is both of those ideas smushed together, which is wonderful. That is, I think, all of the commentary I've got for this set. It looks pretty darn neat, and I like how it's merging together all of these different ideas. I didn't feel like I could spin that out into an entire video, so that's the summary of my thoughts on the set. But since we're here anyway, how would you like for it to be time for a history lesson? Yay! As I was looking at this set and trying to come up with an idea for something that we could say that would be different to what everybody else is saying, I thought of the inspiration for these kinds of LEGO sets, for the Ninjago City sets, which are all very cyberpunk. They're very much inspired by Southeast Asian culture in general, and the way that these big metropolises tend to sprawl and interconnect, and how you've got different walkways connecting different parts of the city, and you've got people who are living above other people, and you've got buildings and establishments that are all running next to each other and on top of each other and sideways to each other, and I thought to myself, this is a brilliant opportunity to talk about the inspiration for this kind of cyberpunk city, because the Ninjago City design, this kind of aesthetic, which initially debuted with LEGO in the LEGO Ninjago movie, it has its roots in a lot of popular culture from around the world, which has been interpreting these kinds of cyberpunk ideas and what it would actually be like to live in this kind of teeming mass of people. And the thing is, a lot of these stories, your Cyberpunk 2077, your Ghost in the Shell, your Blade Runner, all of these stories, they're based on an actual city that once existed. The Kowloon Walled City in Hong Kong was demolished all the way back in the 1990s, but it has left an indelible mark on popular culture ever since. Particularly, I feel, in Japanese popular culture, where a lot of artists looked at the Walled City and said, there but for the grace of our government go us, because you can definitely see how Japanese culture is very concerned in many ways about what it is like to have so many people smushed together in a space like that, and that kind of endless urban sprawl that travels not just outwards but also upwards. In fact, I'm being very careful to label all of the photos in this video so that you know, because some of these photos are not from the actual walled city itself, but are from Warehouse Kawasaki in Japan, which was an arcade which was set up to look exactly like the Kowloon Walled City. It's essentially slum Disneyland, where they've recreated something that was probably an absolute nightmare to actually live in, but for nostalgic purposes, because it's got that cultural appeal for Japanese people. You're also going to be seeing footage from the Jean-Claude Van Damme movie Bloodsport, which filmed partly in the Walled City, and the Jackie Chan film Crime Story, which filmed in part of the Walled City as well. And these, I think, give you a really nice look at what the city was actually like, despite the fact that I reckon Bloodsport has specifically picked the dingiest, grimiest looking streets. But you can see how it's a place that is just stacked on top of other buildings. There's just things on top of things on top of things, interconnected walkways, so that a lot of people wouldn't bother going down to the ground level, because why would you? You would go through the middle of different buildings and over rooftops in order to get from one business to another business. This is essentially the kind of interconnected chaos that inspired a lot of cyberpunk cities, and continues to inspire a lot of cyberpunk cities, and inspired LEGO mock designers who have created very similar works in LEGO form, which then in turn have also gone on to inspire the LEGO Ninjago Movie and the Ninjago City sets. And I specify mock creators here because I want it to be clear that there is no one source of inspiration for the Ninjago City sets. These are pulling from all kinds of different popular culture things. It's just that a lot of that pop culture flows back to the Kowloon Walled City as a point of initial inspiration. But there's obviously a lot more in here. And one of the things that you do see reflected in a lot of the Ninjago City sets are the works of fan designers who have helped to inform what a cyberpunk LEGO city looks like. In particular, I want to draw attention to New Hashima, which is a MOC that has been worked on for decades at this point by dozens, if not more, of very talented LEGO fan designers who've all contributed little pieces to making this the most expansive and sprawling cyberpunk LEGO city that you can possibly imagine. There is a link down in the description to a Brick Nerd article which goes into far more detail than I have time to right now, but I just want to make it clear that these are parts of the inspiration for the idea of a cyberpunk, vaguely East Asian-ish Ninjago City. But before we talk more about MOCs and before we talk more about Ninjago City and Ninjago City Workshops itself, let's talk about the Kowloon Walled City and how that came about. Basically, it all starts with the British obsession with tea. No, really. So it's the 1800s and the British cannot get enough tea. Literally cannot get enough tea. And it's not like the East India Trading Company are not doing their absolute best to source tea. I mean, look at what they did to India just for the sake of getting tea. So, in order to try and get hold of more tea, the British have a brand new idea: we'll go trade with China. They've got loads of tea. And the Chinese emperor says, no, because you have nothing that I want. I'm not going to trade with you. To which the British respond, we got loads of opium. You can have as much opium as you want. And the Chinese emperor says, why would I want opium? No, get that out of my country. To which the British said, make us. And so we have an opium war. Skipping over all of these specifics, at the end of the Second Opium War, the British and Chinese governments sign a lease, where essentially China says, we will allow you to borrow Hong Kong and the surrounding new territories for a period of 99 years, and in response, you will stop shooting our underfunded navy. But in order to keep a vague eye on Hong Kong, the Chinese government has an enclave set up in Kowloon, in a walled area which has been a military base for a very long time at that point already, and that is the Kowloon Walled City. Fast forward a long way to the end of World War II, and there are a lot of refugees throughout China who are now homeless and are looking for a new place to live, and they all flock to Hong Kong and then into the Walled City, which is technically part of China. Very quickly, a tremendously small area is filled up with loads and loads of refugees who are all building houses on top of houses and connecting buildings to other buildings and making walkways across different buildings and just exploding this weird, wonderful, wild collection of houses in a way that is absolutely not safe one bit. But there are no laws here, because the British government looks at it and says, oh, it's part of China, and the Chinese government look at it and say, oh no, it's in Hong Kong, that's not ours right now. And so nobody can really touch this, and so you've got this lawless, wild east of a place. And it is an absolute mess of a place, often called the City of Darkness, because underneath the top level of buildings, there is no sunlight whatsoever in this entire establishment. There are lights, there is some electricity, but some parts of the place have electricity and some don't. And so there are huge power cables that are run and strung between different buildings in order to provide more power in what is probably the most unsafe way you can possibly imagine. Very quickly, this becomes the most densely populated place on Earth, and business thrives because there are no labour laws, there are no health and safety laws, there are no issues saying that a dentist absolutely has to have a license, and so all kinds of different businesses and factories and manufacturing places and restaurants all set up here. It is essentially a libertarian paradise. And also it's full of crime, because of course it is. Not wanting to go into too much detail, there were very few services or substances that you would not be able to get your hands on in the Kowloon Walled City, and that was a problem. So for a lot of people, this is characterized as a very crime-ridden, very dirty, very grimy, very low-quality place to live. But at the same time, you also see communities forming here, and you had like neighborhood watchers who were escorting single women when they were moving around places to make sure they were safe. You had the specific decision not to build buildings over the yamen, the old-fashioned military actual buildings in the middle of the city, so that there was at least one spot here where there was some sunlight and where there was some breathing room and where the old buildings could be maintained. And those buildings are still there to this day. And so it's not really a surprise that there's this romanticization of the Kowloon Walled City in a lot of popular culture, because yes, on the one hand, it was a hive of scum and villainy that Obi-Wan Kenobi would blush over. But on the other hand, it was a community, and it was a place where a lot of people lived and worked and did absolutely very normal things, despite the fact that they were all stacked on top of each other in such a higgledy-piggledy fashion. Higgledy-piggledy is, of course, the scientific term for this. Now in 1997, that lease that Britain had on Hong Kong expired and it returned to Chinese rule. And so a few years before that, the British and the Chinese governments finally got together and said, okay, do you know what? We probably need to do something about the walled city. And so they bulldozed it. A lot of the people that lived there at the time were not thrilled about this. They were given some compensation, but they protested heavily because this was essentially their homes and their communities and their families and their wider connection to the world all being shattered. And so there is a nostalgic longing for this weird city, this place where, yes, it was lawless and terrifying to actually live in, and you had no sunlight, but at the same time, you had a level of freedom and community that you wouldn't get anywhere else. And you see these kinds of two sides of it in an awful lot of cyberpunk works. You see it in Ghost in the Shell, you see it in Blade Runner, you see it in Mega City 1 from Judge Dredd, you see it in Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones. This kind of idea of a community of people who have no sunlight because the city has built up around them. Also, a brilliant recent example from video games, the video game Stray, shows you the absolute beauty of this place in a way that I feel like Bloodsport makes it look all dark and dingy. But if you look at Stray and you look at some of this footage that we've been showing from this game, you can see that there is actually this wonderful beauty to the place at the same time. Now, as said, I'm not saying that the Ninjago City Workshops is a one-to-one translation of anything that was going on in the Kowloon Walled City. There were no giant mechs in the Walled City, for example. I also should probably point out that there were no docks in the Kowloon Walled City, but there are an awful lot of docks nearby because Hong Kong is a major shipping port. And of course, there are a bunch of other Southeast Asian cities that have a very similar vibe to Hong Kong, and parts of the Walled City can be seen reflected in them as well. That's why the Walled City appeals so much, I think, to the Japanese cultural mindset. And Ninjago is not a deliberate attempt to recreate just Japanese culture in spite of its name, which does sound specifically ninja-based. Ninjago is not Monkey Kid, for example. Monkey Kid is very specifically deliberately Chinese. The LEGO Group get in Chinese artists and Chinese writers in order to craft these stories to make them feel as Chinese as possible for a Chinese audience. Ninjago instead is made for a mostly European/Western audience, and Japan can have some of it if they want to, but really this is a European company interpreting Southeast Asian culture and throwing together a bunch of different things, kind of like Avatar: The Last Airbender, rather than focusing on just one country within Southeast Asia. And you can really see how these Ninjago City sets have grown out of what the fan community was doing long before any of the sets came along. I think these fan designers absolutely deserve an awful lot of credit for what we have ultimately got with these Ninjago City sets. And if you're watching this video at this point, you're probably fairly familiar with the history of Ninjago anyway, and the things that came before it. How ninjas started as an offshoot of the castle theme, how the LEGO Group tried a bunch of different attempts at ninjas/Japanese mech style things, with things like Exoforce. Finally, Ninjago comes out, and that's really the winning formula with a nice balance and mix of all of the different things that the LEGO Group have been experimenting with for a while. That does very well, and then they decide that they want to make a Ninjago movie in the same kind of style and vein as the LEGO movie and the LEGO Batman movie, and it is, I think, probably the weakest of the LEGO movies of that particular period, but still very, very strong, with a surprisingly poignant message about family and connectivity. But in order for that film to work, they really needed to flesh out the world of Ninjago beyond just the sets that we had seen up until that point. And so you get this sprawling Ninjago city, and you get all of the different things that entails in the film. And then you get a set which is based on that. And now, long after the film has been mostly forgotten, we're still getting these Ninjago City sets because that first set was such a winning formula, building on the things that appear in the film itself, and then also building on the history of mocks and fan designs for cyberpunk cities, which all of this in turn builds on the variety of different works of cyberpunk storytellers across various different mediums, books and films and cartoons and video games and comics and all of these things, which in turn themselves are drawing on real life inspiration, big cities, large communities of people all living together, and indeed the Kowloon Walled City, which is the ultimate apotheosis, the kind of final endpoint of what a really interconnected, really densely populated city will become. And so now we have the Ninjago City Workshop set, which is an absolutely brilliant continuation of everything we've had from the Ninjago City sets thus far. As said, I really like the mech. I think it's a wonderful inclusion of something that ties together various different disparate parts of the Ninjago theme into this one set. I'll be very interested to see if people can swap out the mech which is in the set, which is admittedly maybe not as strong as some of the other dedicated mech sets that we've had from Ninjago in recent years and put in different mechs instead to see what that looks like. Or indeed expand this set out a little bit so that there's like a, I don't know, a kind of a display area for all of the various different Ninjago mechs. It might just be having talked so much about the history of Hong Kong in this video that I've just got Hong Kong on the mind now, but looking at this set, it does give off some strong Pacific Rim vibes for me, which is another wonderful cyberpunk work which just so happens to feature Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is a brilliant cyberpunk city even in real life. But what do you think of Ninjago City Workshops? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Are there other inspirations for the set that you are aware of that you would like to share? Let us know those as well. Make sure, by the way, that if you are going to be purchasing anything from LEGO in the near future, that you use the affiliate link, which is down in the description, or the QR code that is currently on screen. They take you straight to the LEGO website. We get a little bit of the percentage of the sale when you make that purchase through those links. It doesn't cost you a penny extra, but it helps to keep the lights on at Brick Fanatics. Make sure, please, that you do all of the rest of the YouTube things and give this video a thumbs up and hit subscribe and the notification bell. Make sure that you go to brickfanatics.com for all coverage of all things Ninjago City and sign up to our newsletter so that you never miss anything LEGO related ever again. Thank you very much for watching and have a lovely day.